From village halls to the Royal Albert Hall, there is a song which has a unique power to move the hearts and minds of the English.
Jerusalem is the one time when I actually do feel pride in being English.
Jerusalem represents what we are. We're English, we're proud of it, we live in a lovely country, we love what we are, we love our country.
When I sing Jerusalem, I feel that represents my feelings. Not entirely about what England is now, but what I want England to become.
This film tells the story of how that song struck a chord at the core of the English establishment.
The statements of loyalty to the country appeal to the Conservative Party. We feel a very strong bond with the country, a very strong degree of loyalty to the country, an idea of service beyond ourselves.
And yet remained a song of protest.
So that's why the trade union movement was formed, to do away with the dark satanic mills, to give people a good way of life.
It's the story of disputes in the Church of England.
I don't want to see it sung in church, and I would discourage it being sung in church because of the words. I think people ban Jerusalem because they're on a power kick. To me, if somebody wants to sing Jerusalem, that means it means something to them.
And it's about a wider struggle to regain pride in English identity.
I know that the BNP used it, of course. And of course that was part of our thinking, was to take it away from them. You know, you're saying other people love this.
It's the story of Jerusalem, an anthem for England.
I think Jerusalem is the English song. It's about England and about how we perceive England and would like England to be.
The history of Jerusalem reflects the changing face of England in the 20th century. Its power to move a nation began when the music was composed in the dark days of the First World War.
Sing the song of Rule Britannia, now there's fighting work to do. Every salt and ready friends, the hour is nigh. British boys know how to fight and how to die.
By the end of 1915, the cheery optimism which had characterized the first year of the war had begun to disappear. The great surge of volunteers who had signed up to do their duty for king and country had almost dried up. In January 1916, the government was forced to introduce conscription, and there was a new song on the lips of soldiers route marching through the English lanes. For the first time, there were fears a demoralized country would give in to Germany. To mobilize public support behind the war, a new campaign was launched. It was called Fight for Right.
Fight for Right was designed to appeal when people were perhaps beginning to question the war for the first time, what its real purpose was. And of course, you know, Fight for Right was trying to suggest that this was a just war. This was something that Britain and its allies needed to win. And they looked for cultural agencies to promulgate the message of Fight for Right. And so various musicians, various writers, various scientists and major public figures were asked to join. One of the important people was the poet laureate, Robert Bridges, and he was a very active member of Fight for Right.
Robert Bridges published an anthology of poems designed to stir patriotic feelings. Amongst the anthology were the words of a poem written over 100 years earlier in 1803 by the artist and poet William Blake.
Bring me my bow of burning gold, bring me my arrows of desire, bring me my spear, O clouds unfold, bring me my chariot of fire.
Jerusalem is quintessential Blake. You've got ideas of England. I mean, the word England tolls through the poem 3 times. The other key thing is that it's a poem about fighting. It's about fighting for what you believe in, trying to build a better world.
I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land.
Robert Bridges believed Blake's words perfectly embodied the moral superiority of Britain over Germany, and decided they should be set to music as an anthem for Fight for Right. To compose the score, he approached one of the most distinguished musicians of the age, Charles Hubert Parry.
Parry was the founder of the English musical renaissance of the late 19th century. You know, England, according to a German critic, was the land without music, and indeed, you know, we had to go back to Purcell to find, the end of the 17th century, to find a British composer who really rated.
Parry's diaries are now kept by his family in Shulbreed Priory in Sussex. They tell the story of how the music was composed.
This is where we keep the diaries, and that is Hubert Parry's desk. And we've got a few of the diaries out. This one here, 1916, I'll just have a look at that. And he wrote it very quickly, in fact. And he only got the words on the 7th of March from Robert Bridges. And on the 10th of March, we find, wrote a tune for some words of Blake's Bridges sent me. So he writes that on that day. And then the 11th of March, he writes, made tidy copy of the tune to Blake's stanzas.
Jerusalem is a fantastic tune, and one of the reasons it's a fantastic tune is because instead of having a tiny little range, one man went to my meadow, it's got a big range. It pushes the voice right down and right up. So in the first phrase, and in those sweet and ancient songs, the whole octave, just that first phrase. But then in the next phrase, he goes way below that. Walk upon England's mountains green. And a great tune is like a great landscape. It's got to have rises and falls and rises and falls and one great mountain in the middle there. And that's really what he's doing with this music. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes even further down and further up. And that's why it's such a wonderful tune. Now the other thing is that we're often looking of ways of finding out why something sounds English. And I'll just give you one example from this tune. At the end, he builds to his great climax. Till we have built Jerusalem. Now, that's the big climax. After that, the tune contracts again in a sort of reserved way, as if you've been slightly embarrassed about your patriotism in the previous line. And it goes, in England's green and pleasant land. It comes back down again like a flower, contracting. Now, there are many nations in the world whose climax would be the last chord. Aren't we great? But in fact, I think it's quite an English thing that this tune has its climax before that moment, and then at the end, it just contracts down into a... I mean, I know it ends loud, but in fact, in terms of the shape of the tune, it comes back down again like a full stop.
The response in 1916 was overwhelming. Within weeks, Parry's score had been distributed throughout the country. Social groups, choral societies and schools were all encouraged to sing Jerusalem. Within months, it had become a rallying cry to arms. Today, that legacy lingers on at the very core of the English establishment, at public schools like Eton and Harrow.
Harrow was hugely affected by the First World War. 636 Harrovians were killed over that short 4-year period. That's the equivalent of over 3/4 of the present school. It's touching to read the citations that go alongside their death announcement. The majority were under the age of 30. They had responded to the call to arms like so many in the country, and died fighting alongside the men that they were leading. And I suppose the vision of Jerusalem, going out and building a better land, being prepared to give of oneself in that task is one that strikes chords in the ethos of the public school system.
It reminds me of, to some extent, the British Empire, as well as especially the first four notes are so kind of uplifting and rousing and British. Duty.
Sacrifice were particularly two examples of the values that were religiously taught here. But I think they still, to a great extent, are. I mean, getting on with the community often involves following orders, doing your duty as part of the team, and sacrificing what you want to do for others.
Jerusalem's standing as a powerful patriotic anthem was strengthened in 1922 when another of England's great composers, Sir Edward Elgar, reorchestrated Parry's tune.
Elgar's orchestration gives it some oomph, it gives it lift, it gives it takeoff, it goes off into the stratosphere. Elgar, you know, who'd learnt so much from Parry, who described Parry as the father of our profession. I mean, he did it as an act of obeisance to a man he'd learnt a lot from, and suddenly Blake, Parry, Elgar, geniuses, all came together to give this thing the lift that means that we love it. Because let's face it, when do you get three geniuses working like that? Not often.
Elgar's orchestration wedded Jerusalem to a vision of an unchanging, unchangeable, quietly defiant England. When the country was plunged into war a second time, Jerusalem helped remind the nation what they were fighting for. At the Battle for Freedom pageant at the Royal Albert Hall, Lieutenant Laurence Olivier quoted from Henry V.
From this hour on, our watchwords will be urgency, speed, courage. Urgency in all our decisions, speed in the execution of all our plans, courage in face of all our enemies, and may God bless our cause!
And just as they had in 1916, thousands of service personnel joined together to sing Jerusalem.
You know, when people were fighting the Nazis, they were actually fighting, they believed, for the right cause. Now, when you sing Jerusalem, it sort of taps into that feeling. We want to build something right. It's not my country right or wrong. It's my country right. And we want to make that country right. Whenever we had remembrance services, you obviously need to sing patriotic songs. I always felt Jerusalem was the most important song, and we would sing all sorts, but we would always sing Jerusalem.
We now conclude our act of commemoration by singing Jerusalem.
The role it played in 2 world wars has ensured Jerusalem's place at the heart of remembrance. But there is another, more radical tradition with which Jerusalem began to be associated in 1917, just a year after the music was composed.
You can put me upon a treadmill and I'll never, never fret. But for pity's sake, don't put me near a suffragette.
The women's suffrage movement had used song because there'd been fantastic propagandists, really. They'd used Rule Britannia, but they'd rewritten the last line, half of Britons never, never shall be slaves, because they still saw that women didn't have the vote. But of course the words of Jerusalem didn't need changing, because the imagery was there.